Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm going to do a little bit of tuning up that I need to do to this carburetor before we move forward with putting it back on the car. Now basically, like I said before, everything was ready for an overhaul. It was coming up on maintenance time, and really it was the perfect time, even though we were still running points, which that wasn't good, but it was kind of a perfect time for something to mess up. So I needed to stop and do some maintenance anyway. And first thing I do is get the fuel line out of the way. I have a notched float in the back bowl to clear jet extensions. And what jet extensions are, let me go ahead and open up this. This is a standard Holley jet extension float. And what comes in the kit is these two jet extensions. And what these do, these screw into your metering block, and then your jets screw into the end of these. And what it does is it moves them farther back in the bowl. When you accelerate on a drag car, the fuel sloshes to the back of the bowl and leaves the jets. Well, these basically are spacers to push the jets farther to the back so that the jets stay submerged in the fuel. Now, I'm not going to need these because this carburetor's already got a set. But what I do need to do is replace this notched float. And they lay in these little grooves right here, and thus the notched float nomenclature. Well, this thing's made out of neoprene, and every couple of years you need to replace them because they'll become saturated with fuel. This is one of those things where it's worth the money to buy a genuine Holley or like an AED, which is basically sort of kind of a genuine Holley. It's made from the same stuff. And they'll get heavy and they'll sink, just like an old brass float gets a hole in it and sinks. So what you do is just pop the bowl off, and of course I had to take the fuel rail off to get the bowl off. Now, this carburetor is going to have to be rejetted for the new engine. The 408, I'm sure, is going to have different jetting than the previous 358 had. Now when you put your bowl back on, the big thing you have to watch out for is to make sure you get the squirter lever back under. Let me see if I can point you down a little bit here. Get the squirter lever back under this actuator arm here, because when you pull your throttle, there's a cam in here, and that's what moves your squirter. So you just have to make sure that's lined back up. And this bowl hasn't been off for a bit, so we may have to tap it to get it to come loose, and it looks like we're going to have to. And now it's starting to rain, so I may have to stop filming. Boy, this thing's got a hold, but good. Okay, so it's starting to move. And I gotta tell you, they've been on there for 2 years. And I let it dry out. So that's the bulk of the problem. But here's the thing. You gotta go gentle and be patient with it, because this thing's made out of pot metal. There we go. She won't come on off now. Okay. And when I put these on there, I did WD-40 them. Wow. Wow. It tore right through the middle of the blue gasket. Now that is unusual. Boy, this is a mess. I gotta get in here and get this off. Okay, so when you go to put the float back together, this gets a little tricky, but not terribly tricky. Here's the spring. Let me head up here in front of the camera. I don't know if it's going to focus in on it or not. Here's the spring. And as you can see, it's a little tiny thing. The little bottom wire there, it goes in that hole in the float right there. And then the long piece dogs up. Let me turn this around. Dogs up in that little slot right there under the screw that you can see. So as you can imagine, it's a little bit fun to put this thing together. So what you do is you put the little short end into that hole. Then you bring your pin through. It usually requires a little nudge with the screwdriver. This is really the hardest part of this whole thing. And what this spring does is it helps the float not bounce. There we go. It's just a shock absorber for the float, really. So when you get it back in, see the little bottom piece is hanging throughout the bottom here. And you can actually just push on that and move the whole thing. See if I can get it sideways and get it to focus. You can see it hanging out down here. And then up here, it's just barely sticking through right there. You can kind of see it right over here. And that's all there is to it. Then when you put it back in, you can see these two holes down in here. Here, I'll use a bolt to point at them. You can see the two holes down in here. That's where the two little screws go to hold float in. And basically you just take it, kind of line it up, and drop it in. And then you can push up on it and you can see under there. You put some light on it. You can see under there and see that the pin's in the slots. And then the float will go right back down. And then all you got to do is hold it open. You can get your finger in here and hold the plate down and get your holes lined up. And after you do this once or twice, it's really nothing to it. And they made the holes deep, so it's easy to get them in the hole, get the bolts back in, or the screws back in, whichever you want to call them. And it's like anything else, you want to go gentle, especially with this pot metal body, because you can pull the threads out of it real easy. And it's not super tight. It got a little lock washer on them, and all you want to do is lock that lock washer. And there it is. And as you can see, the spring's holding the float down. And you point it this way, it does go down. And that way it's free to move on gravity and fuel level. Now, here's the needle and seat itself. And as you can see, this one's wanting to stick. And the float pushes that up. And it's sticking. That's what the float's actually moving. And see, there's a little neoprene end in there, and it gets sticky and gooey from fuel and sticks. Now, this carburetor ain't had a lot of runs on it, but we did let it dry out, so I'm trying not to do a master rebuild on it. And there's a bunch of stuff that I'm not going to use out of this kit, but that stuff will find its way into the extras bag, because you know at the track people always come up and they need little odd and end carburetor stuff, and it's stuff that you either got to buy in bulk or buy a kit. And there's 2 brand new needles and seats. And as you can see on this one, let me get around here where you can see it. See, it's nice and loose. That's what you want. Okay, so what I got to do now, I got a little bit of residual oil from the Mean Green machine build the other day. And we'll just put a nice little light coat in the oil on the O-ring. And that should make all the difference in the world. Yep. Going right on in there now. Alright. Big seal. Adjuster. Little seal. Run that down. And what we would do if we were on the car is we would hold the lock nut and lock the screw. And now it's set and it shouldn't leak. Alright, so there's that one. And that one's stuck again already. So we'll set this over to the side. We're going to spin the carburetor back around. And this is the primary side. I'm going to go ahead and pull everything off. And this one's completely stuck. There it goes. And it's stuck again. So we get that one out of the way. Again with a little drop of oil. And these are all AED needles and seats, so they're pretty close. And I had about 3 threads sticking out. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this back about where it was. And then when I first start the car up, we'll see where the fuel bowl is, where the sight plug says it's at. It should be pretty close. Put the big seal back. Put the adjuster back. Make sure the washer's on the lock nut, which it is. Screw it down. Gonna have to mess with it in the car, I know, but I'm gonna go ahead and lock it. That way fuel don't go spraying all over the place when we fire it back up. And on the good side, race car has got an electric fuel pump on it, so we can check ahead of time. Now, give one more last look around in here on the bowl. Make sure we got everything. There's a top and a bottom to this gasket. Make sure it's on the pins. Now, with it curving like that, what I'll do is put it back in. Put it back on. Right now, here's the important part. You got to make sure your actuator gets under the little lever. So you make sure you're under the lever. Make sure you're under the actuator. And there you go. It's back on. I've got my new float in. In all honesty, I usually do that on the car, and you know what? I'm getting ready to mess up. Let me pull that back off. I forgot to put some WD-40 on this. Or a very light coating of oil. So for this one this time, since it gave me trouble with the WD the last time, I think I'm going to go with the light coating of oil. There we go. Got the curve to it. Put it back on. Get that out of the way for a second. Alright, we gotta come back down on this and this. Got that one in. Make sure your little nylon ring washers are still on your screws because you need them to seal. And then just like tightening up valve cover bolts, manifold bolts, whatever, you go diagonal and across. And it's nothing gorilla tight about it. Just good and snug. And there we go. And now this carburetor is ready to put on. I'll stick the fuel rail back on it. And we'll flip it one time, make sure everything's working. And it is. Alright, so this one's ready to go back on the car. And it's starting to rain again. And I think it's here to stay this time. Okay. So now that we've got that done, remember the easiest thing to strip on a Holley is the fuel bowl threads. So always use 2 wrenches when you're tightening these up. There we go. And this is ready to put it on the 408, tune it, see how things go, and then you see it looks like there's nothing wrong with it. And if you had them in your hands, you can actually feel the difference in this one and the one that's in the bowl currently. Anyway, I know that wasn't a full rebuild, but that was a good little how-to pointer tips on just changing out your float. Since I already had the extensions on this one, these just go in a spare box, so if somebody loses one, needs one, we lose one, need one, whatever, we got it. And then the rest of the kit just becomes spare parts and goes into parts boxes. So there we go. New needles and seats, got 2 years out of them. New float, got 2 years out of it. And the next thing I got to do is out on the car, put a new diaphragm in the regulator, and the fuel system should be ready to go. And I want to install that other fuel filter that I got that I showed in the update video. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, or subscribe below. This is something that's a good confidence builder, help you step out of your comfort zone, and it takes some of the mystery out of it when you see somebody actually do it. These things are actually so simple that they're easy to screw up. So just keep it in mind, go slow. If you run into something you don't know, ask a question, do some research, find some information. There's plenty of it out there. Read through it. Read it carefully, pass a little judgment on it. As your experience gets better, you'll know which ones to, okay, that's reasonable, okay, that's not reasonable. Keep it in mind. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, get better by learning. Learn to get better. Go out and build something cool with what you learned. Thanks for watching.